Hey everybody, Scott Davis here with Stonebranch. I'm pretty excited to share some recent research we did. When I say recent, I mean just in January, about the global state of IT automation. Now, this is our second year of doing this research, so we have some trend data and some important things about this research I'd like to call out. First, the research was done globally, so we have really good representation from North America, South America, EMEA, and APAC. Second, we limited the research only to respondents that were in IT ops, data ops, cloud ops, and DevOps. So it's really highly focused on those disciplines across the globe, and there's some really great findings, especially when we look at them year over year. I'm joined today by Peter Baljet. He's our Chief Technology Officer. I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. What I want to say up front are just a few housekeeping things. Number one, if you have any questions at any point, please add them to the chat. You can go ahead and do that. Also, the research report itself, which was just released today, is available for download in the resources section. So you can click in there, download it, and get access to the report. Hopefully you'll stick around to listen to our commentary because we have some good insight. With that said, I'm going to pass it over to Peter. Peter, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Scott. Peter Baljet here. I'm Chief Technology Officer here at Stonebranch, and I work with our product teams and our customers really to make sure that our product direction is in line with the industry trends. Real happy to be here today to talk about the results of our survey. This is something we also use for ourselves really to help us look at where we need to focus from a product standpoint. We actually looked at the data and had 7 takeaways from it. And the way we've kind of organized this is really to look at those 7 takeaways and look at the data that was behind each of them. And so we're going to take them one by one and talk through them.
So we're starting off with cloud and how it's going to take over the world. Why don't you talk us through it?
Thanks. Yeah. So, what was really interesting is automation really is a big priority for organizations, both at the enterprise level. We had 33% at the enterprise level say they had initiatives at that level. And then really at the team and individual level, we're seeing priorities there as well. And this is backed by some of the industry data that we're seeing where automation is a top investment area. The top 3, I think, that I've seen are cloud, automation, and then data science, data ops. What's interesting is that the data science, data ops, as well as cloud, also involve a lot of automation. So it really is one of the strategic areas that we're seeing with every company these days.
And it's kind of staggering to see that 81% plan to grow the use of their automation this next year, which kind of takes us into the next slide. Let's talk about this one.
Yeah, it really is. This we wanted to break it down a little bit further. And, the top 3 items here are the ones that have been kind of the automation mainstay the past couple of years. Cloud, obviously, cloud is always automation first. Infrastructure automation, there's still a lot of on-premise IT systems. And, with everybody using hypervisors, there's a lot of infrastructure automation on top of that to treat it like the cloud. And then DevOps, with the Agile becoming, the predominant way we develop software. DevOps, which is the CI/CD world, has a lot of automation in it too. But we've also seen other areas kind of come up in automation as a priority. Workload automation is pretty much been there. That's been the automation that's been a lot in on-premise historically. Data pipeline automation. So with all of the proliferation of data and data science, we see data pipeline automation becoming very, very much prevalent in companies. And then the traditional business process automation, RPA, hyperautomation. The one thing I'd like to point out is the service orchestration and automation platform, SOAP. This was a new category coined by Gartner. And really, this is an orchestration layer that's being driven by all the different types of automation. Companies have a lot of these different areas, but how do you have a platform that helps manage it all from a cost standpoint, as well as operating all of those, the automation? So this is an area that we also see growing year over year.
And what's interesting, Peter, is SOAP is very new, right? It was a category that was introduced by Gartner in 2020. So to have it be so highly represented on this list, really not that much different from DevOps and infrastructure from a percentage standpoint is really neat. And so it really is an evolution from workload automation. So Gartner stopped covering workload automation as a category many, many years ago, and it picked it back up in 2020 only as an evolution they called service orchestration. And the real difference is the service orchestration automation platform's ability to automate both on-premises, like traditional workload automation,
Right.
and in the cloud. So as Peter said, it does cover just about every other automation piece on this tool, but it doesn't necessarily do it by itself. Typically, it'll automate the automator, right? It'll tap into these other tools. And we'll talk more about that as we keep going. So Peter, we decided to look at this one level down, right? And we wanted to know by region what the top initiatives are. Why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah, trends typically differ by geography. So we wanted to look and see what the trends with automation were in the different 4 primary geographies. And as you can see, cloud for 3 of them, North America, EMEA, and South America is the top one. Cloud, again, is an automation type first environment. So if you're going to do cloud, you're going to do automation. And there's a lot of reasons for that I think people are very familiar with. It was interesting that cloud in APAC was 3rd. The top one being infrastructure, which could mean that just they're not adopting cloud as fast as the other regions. They still are either in private clouds or their own on-premise systems.
And we see that, right, when we speak with clients and prospects in APAC. I mean, they are adopting the cloud. I mean, it's number 3 on the list, but they're still heavily using on-premises mainframes and distributed servers, right, in a large part. So,
and what's interesting is there we do see data pipeline automation there kind of as being used a lot.
Exactly. All right, so let's go to the next one.
Yeah, this was interesting. Cloud, what's really interesting is, hey, how much is it being used for what we call production jobs, meaning a business critical function? And you can see that really there's a lot of companies that have changed from 2022 to 2023. You can see that they are doing production level jobs, in the cloud with automation. The other thing is we see that the capacity is pretty much the same. So one of the things that's nice about the cloud and trying to automate across them is that you can use it for peak capacity needs. And in order to do that efficiently, you really need automation to help that out. But again, when you look at these percentages, I think there's a lot of saying that's here to stay. That really automation in the cloud is really going to be there for some time to come.
Yeah, I mean, not only are 95% of respondents using cloud resources to run scheduled jobs, but year over year, ad hoc being the first place in 2022 drops a whole lot where permanent picks it up. So
this is and this is really what you're seeing is that we've gone from a world where everybody's trying to write different types of automation and really trying to get away from that and getting more standardized in terms of how they build and run automation.
I think it also shows some confidence in the cloud, right? I mean, up till recently, people are still just trying it out. Like, can we do this? Can we do that? And the idea that it's now permanent is a really good sign for the cloud. All right. So not everybody's using the cloud to run jobs. So what were the top reasons that people cited that they did not place jobs in the cloud? This is equally as interesting. So Peter, I'll let you start.
Yeah. So I found this interesting, because I've seen this myself in terms of you get into the cloud and it's so easy to consume that you end up spending a lot of money. And so you can see here, the cost has now risen up to the top. This is probably also somewhat just because of the economic, the economy's out there not doing as well and companies being more focused on cost. My guess is it's a combination of the two driving that to the top one. Security obviously is going to be up there. That's always an ongoing concern because cloud is still new, and we're still learning all of the controls that we need to put in place to secure it like we do our on-premise systems. And then performance concerns was also interesting. The cloud may not be the best place to run something. You actually may be able to run something better and cheaper on premise than on the cloud. And so I think the performance concerns is a reason why that's bubbling up. So it's interesting to see some of these.
That's in a lot of cases why the mainframe still exists, right? Things like that. It runs fast, it's reliable, and
and it's kind of specialized workload. So there's specialized workloads that you may be able to optimize your own infrastructure to run more efficiently than you can in the cloud. So we see some things being shifted back to the on-prem world.
Yeah, and one of the other big call-outs here that I can't help but notice is that lack of integration of automation platforms went from number 1 to number 6. And I think there's a reason for that. So, I mean, we live and breathe this world all the time. And going back to last year, the year before, integrating your automation, your on-prem automation tool to the cloud is a real limitation for some vendors, right? They cannot do a good job in the cloud. They cannot integrate with cloud tools. And there's a few that can now. I mean, Stonebranch can. There's a few others that have gotten good at it. And I think it's made it easier for people to access the cloud using the traditional tools that they've always used, right? But there's a lot of people that still don't have that. And we see that kind of play out in the rest of this survey.
Right.
All right. So that takes us to our next point. Multi-cloud environments are on the rise. Peter, there's a lot of different cloud providers out there. Why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah, so this is interesting where you still have a lot of companies. Still the biggest footprint out there is on premise. Cloud has not overtaken that, but you can see these percentages are pretty much the same in terms of the people are using multiple clouds, multiple private clouds, and we think what this is driven by is really people are going towards best of breed. So usually you start with one just to get your feet wet, gain experience, but there's different benefits and different capabilities in each of the cloud providers. And so you're seeing that people are going to drift more towards using multiple of them. They typically have companies using a primary, but then you'll have specialized workloads here also. The other thing that I know I've seen is that there's B2B stuff going on within the cloud. So where for instance, we used to transfer data a lot using managed file transfers, but we see a lot of companies integrating themselves through the clouds. And while you may have one company on one cloud and another on the other, it's not that hard to transfer data, for instance, from cloud provider to cloud provider.
It's a great segue to the next point. So let me pull that up. Do you automate data transfers between multiple public cloud providers?
Yeah. So moving data among the hybrid IT landscape, as we call it, really is being done by everybody. Here you see almost 90% within the next 12 months is going to be moving data around, and it could be all different directions from on-prem to the cloud. Especially if you're doing data analytics in the cloud, you kind of move data there, but then you may move it other places after you're done with the analytics. And again, like I said earlier, the B2B transfers too is changing, where companies are now kind of just staging data in the cloud and opening it up for certain companies to come get it versus doing managed file transfer. So that's becoming very common too as well.
Brings up an interesting point that managed file transfer, especially as it relates to the cloud, is never done in a vacuum. It's not just moving files. It's usually part of a larger workflow. And especially in the B2B world where you're moving data between companies, it could be something like dropping a file in an S3 bucket that then moves to all of your distributors, right?
Right.
And then they receive it and do something with it. So it's usually part of a larger workflow these days, from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and it's we've got when you look at all the different cloud storage capabilities, it's probably the most common cloud service out there is cloud storage. So it's one of the things that we see. One of the most common the reason why this number is so high is probably because of a lot of data transfers, and storage versus compute. But compute is rising as well.
Yep. All right. So data transfer takes us to the next point. Data pipeline orchestration strategies are evolving. So our first discussion is around the data automation approaches, or really the types of tools people are using to automate their data pipelines.
Yeah. This is again a very fast growing area, and I'll segment this into two parts. If you look at the top two bars here, if you know anything about DataOps and data pipelines, it's very fragmented in terms of the tools and skill sets that you're using because of the common data pipeline process. And so the first two is really kind of, I feel like, where we've been working, which is, you're using automation within a specific tool, like Informatica is probably a good example from an ETL standpoint, or you're doing custom scripts, custom integrations to different tools in whatever language that the developer chooses, or the data engineer chooses. And that's kind of where we've been the last couple of years. But that is very hard to manage and scale because tools are tool specific. And when you have a bunch of scripts and handwritten code, it's very high cost to maintain, and it involves a lot of tribal knowledge sometimes. Where we see people evolving to is the last two bars, which is really going to what we'll call an enterprise grade scheduler orchestration, solution that tries to span the whole data pipeline. There's also open source tools that do this as well. We do see a lot of Apache Airflow out there, for instance, for data automation. So we kind of see this going from the first two migrating over to the second two and seeing that grow over time as data pipelines become more common and more business critical within companies.
And there is an interesting point about this slide right here. The question, the way it was phrased, it asked, which of these do you use? And you could select all four, right? You could select as many as you wanted. It was an open selection. So what I really take away from it is this percentages are so close, right? 49 to 44%. I think the real answer is they're using all of it, right? And no pipeline, very few pipelines right now are automated by an individual orchestration tool. I think they're using a little bit of all of these things when they're building out full pipelines. So I expect that to change, right?
It's
more towards orchestration.
It's funny you mentioned that because there is turnkey data pipelines, solutions, what we call opinionated ways of doing it. But we see that there's so many specialized needs that people want the flexibility to choose the specific tool they want for the specific part of the pipeline, but yet just being able to plug it into some type of orchestration.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to the next slide. There's another point on data pipeline that I think is interesting. It's the frequency of source data updates, and it's changing, right? So why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah, this is you can see not huge, but kind of a slight shift towards data updates becoming more frequent, and this is just, I think, really how the technology's evolving as well. We've got a lot more data being generated today, as everybody knows. But it's traditionally been very batch oriented. You get your data updates on a monthly, weekly basis, maybe every night. You get a batch update. But things are trending more towards more and more frequent updates. Streaming is becoming more and more popular because of the technologies out there. You've got a lot of good streaming tools, and the data analytical tools can handle streaming data. What was most interesting about this is you can see the ad hoc nature has gone down. And what I've seen is that in the data world, they're really trying to be like the software world, where you have the continuous integration, continuous development, build pipelines, where you eliminate all manual effort. And I think that's a big trend in the data world, is to not have anybody manually have to move a file, have to remember once a week that they have to go download and import a file, trying to take automation and pushing it through that whole data world.
Yeah, automating the full data pipeline Gartner would reference it as DataOps, right?
Mhm.
And DataOps is treating your data pipeline just like you would a software development pipeline.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right. So the next big point here, and probably one of the areas where I see the most change year over year, is that self-service automation is booming. And Peter, I'll let you talk through this in a second, but the question we asked here was number of users across the business who have self-service access to your workload automation or service orchestration and automation platform.
Yeah.
So what do you see here, Peter?
Yeah, this is, when self-service is all about giving end users the ability to do things themselves. And when you have, a lot of different automation across the areas that we just talked about, but how do you execute it? So you have somebody build an automation, but then somebody has to execute it. And the building of automation has gone on a lot faster than giving the self-service capability. But now, companies and organizations are getting really good about, hey, I want to give the end user that they can trigger this whenever they want versus having to kind of submit an IT ticket and have somebody manually kick it off, really pushing that to the end user and enabling them to kind of get that agility that comes with the automation. And you want to, again, take out all that manual effort.
And self-service takes a number of different forms, right? I mean, you think self-service is I just give somebody access to my automation tool, but it's the way that you give them access. So business users might access automation through tools they use every day, something like Teams or Slack. They can trigger automation, or they can check on automation, or they can rerun automation through tools like those. Same thing with ITSM tools, right? It's not uncommon for people to integrate their SOAP or workload automation tool with ServiceNow or Jira, to trigger automation. But on the other end of that spectrum, you have something like jobs as code, where developers are actually developing the workflows and the automated tasks within the development platform or IDE of their choice, uploading it to Git, and then promoting it throughout the DevOps process that way, all working within the SOAP or workload automation tool. So, like I said, it takes many forms. And one of the other things that I notice on this result or this slide is that, last year we capped the question at 200 end users. We said 0 to 50, 50 to 100, and 100 to 200. And most people were in the 100 to 200. And so we went and spoke to some of our customers, prospects, and we realized that it went much further, right? It went up into the 1,000 range. And so we expanded the question this year to see just how much further. And, it looks like it taps out about 1,000. We have a customer that did a webcast with us last year, ING Group, the bank and financial institution, and they had in the 1,000 range of end users, and they were enabling them with self-service the ways I talked about, either through jobs as code or through portals that they had created, or through other means that we talked about. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I'll make one other kind of point here that I think is interesting is what we see is when you build automation, it's not just about triggering that automation. There's also information that it takes in to that may be specific to what it's going to do. For instance, you may have some sizing information that you want to put in there, or location that you want something to be stood up in, and if users have to give that information in, and then once it's spun up, the great thing is it's elastic. They may need it for a week or 2 weeks, but then it can spin down automatically after a given time frame. So all that, if you automate all that, you get a very, very good cost savings in terms of, hey, I need this for a week, and then it automatically spins it down, and you never forget about it. So there's a lot of benefits for the self-service in terms of empowering users to kind of do things, but they may need to give some information, and should be just for a limited amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, beyond making life easier for the end users, they're demanding it. IT ops gets that visibility, right? Instead of allowing people to go off and spin up their own automation tools, if they're given a platform as a service, it sort of allows the central IT ops team to still have some sort of visibility and control and observability over everything. So there's a lot of upside here, and I think that's why it's growing so much.
Yeah.
All right. So one level down from this, who is actually using self-service automation? What are the end user roles? And that's kind of what this got to the root of. What do you see here?
Yeah, this is IT operations, cloud operations teams. That's kind of obvious. I think that they're a big user of self-service. Once you have an automation team build an automation, they're going to use it for their specific purposes. Well, the interesting part here is on the right, where we've got data teams that are now using more and more self-service. And a good example of a data team is you may have a team that needs to spin up a database and an environment to do data analytics. They want to do it whenever they want to. So giving them a lot of self-service on that is extremely helpful and very agile for them. Development teams, the same thing. They've got these great CI/CD pipelines that build the software. Deploying it you want to give them that same speed when they're deploying in environments, whether they be for test or prototyping. And then even business users, business users have needs too. And a lot of the capabilities in cloud are business user oriented. So you can even provision them different types of services that they may want to use.
Yep. I just think it's staggering how data teams and development teams have grown so much year over year. I mean, it really shows that it's starting, if not has reached sort of the mainstream usage, which is really good. All right. Next top takeaway is automation has evolved into orchestration. We've talked about this a lot in prior webcast, but here's some data to really solidify it. So Peter, why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah. So what you have here is kind of two sides we looked at. One is IT environments and the other is applications. And you can see a lot of people are using a lot of different environments. Everything from private cloud, on-prem data centers, public cloud, even mainframe and containerized services. There's different automation technologies in these different areas. Some are common, but some are specific, especially when you get into the container and mainframe worlds. What's interesting is that the automations may not live just in those, in those silos. It may be that there's a business process that goes from mainframe over to cloud, or you've got your private cloud going into a containerized application. So you need an orchestration tool really to monitor that automation and kind of make sure everything happens in sequence. That same type of thing that you see there is also in the applications. An enterprise application doesn't live by itself. It typically works across an enterprise applications. That landscape of applications has gone now into SaaS. You've got applications being hosted on the cloud, maybe even natively on the cloud, but yet there's automation that needs to go across all of those applications. And so that bubbles up into a kind of an orchestration layer that is doing all of maybe the individual automations, but also making sure that business process has run. And if anything happens in it, that's an error or something didn't work right, that it takes corrective action.
So there's a lot of places to do automation, a lot of tools to do automation in. That's what I see here. And like Peter said, orchestration is a real key to being able to pull that off. But that takes us to the next point, right? Which is we asked people, because this is so complex, do you plan to replace your workload automation technology in 2023? And before I let Peter talk through the results, I want to call out something. Workload automation is kind of a funny thing, right? It has been a thing for maybe 10 years, maybe 12. Before then, it was job scheduling. Before then, it was batch scheduling. And what we see in the market is these names being interchangeably used across them. SOAP is the latest entry, service orchestration automation. What we take away from this report is that when people are looking for a replacement workload automation solution, it's not because their on-premise stuff isn't working, right? It's that they need additional functionality, and we'll see results to kind of show that as we keep going. But when they say they want a new WLA, it's they're looking for something like soap. They just may not know the name of it because it's such a new category. So with that said, Peter, why don't you talk to the results here a little bit?
Yeah, this is, what this I kind of saw as kind of a same pattern we sometimes see in the industry with what happens on the application side. We went through a time where we had all of these business applications. Companies wanted to consolidate them into enterprise applications, have a fewer kind of landscape of applications. This, I think, is a little bit of the trend in the automation space, where you want to modernize from legacy automation tools and get to a more modern, solution that has better integration, better ways of automating. But also, you may find yourself with a lot of different automation tools and either needing to kind of plug that up into an orchestration layer, or have a tool that can replace those, so you kind of reduce your footprint in the number of technologies that you're trying to manage, because that has all sorts of cost implications, from standardization towards just trying to manage it over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big number, right? When I look at this, 86% plan to replace or add a workload automation platform, and each play is a little bit different. So, and there's different reasons to do it, but let's drill down another layer to explore why, right? What are they trying to get at? So here are the motivations to change workload automation tool sets in 2023. What do you see here, Peter?
Yeah, this is the reduced cost is interesting. That's always one of the drivers. But when we say cost, what specifically do we talk about? I think it's a little bit of, sometimes legacy tools are expensive to maintain. Also, just again, if you don't look at standardization, and you let everybody choose what tool that they're going to use, the cost is going to be much greater, because you got to maintain every specific technology from a knowledge standpoint as well as an operational standpoint. But then also the functionality. If you look at the other slide, there's a lot of more integration points, type of things you have to integrate with. And although the technology for integration is becoming standardized, a lot of the legacy tools can't use those, because either they're end of life or they're not really being innovated with from the companies that have them. So the functional needs are needing to be there too. And then the last one, I think, is customer service. I think companies are seeing the benefits of them doing automation from an agility standpoint. When you can give a data team or development team the ability to kind of spin up environments very quickly, provision resources very quickly, they're able to move a lot faster, and they don't have to wait. So just given that the agility that companies are seeing because of the automation is showing the customer service improvement.
Yeah. And I think customer service also implies, they're just not getting good customer service from their vendor, right? And we see it. It's kind of a legacy industry. Some tools have, like you said, sunset or retired their tools. It's just not. It's a very crowded market that's been around for like 30 years. So, but then you have some companies that are doing a really good job with it. We decided to drill down specifically on the functionality point, right? So, of the people who said, I want better functionality or a more modern tool, what were the features and capabilities that you were looking for? And I think this is a really cool data point. What people are looking for.
Yeah, I thought so too, because I think it demonstrates the popularity of a technology kind of growing and growing, like in the automation space. Because once you have everybody using a tool and it's getting widely adopted, there's certain things that happen. One is they want the usability to be good, right? So we see that in the more modern user interface, and maybe even mobile in there as well. You want the analytics and reports. So now that this is being used pervasively, you want to analyze how well you're using it, and so the analytics and reports and metrics become a way to continuously improve how you're doing automation. So that's kind of the thing that comes next, is the continuous improvement on it as well.
If you don't mind, just to interject, I think the analytics and reports also plays to observability, right? Some of the
Mm-hmm.
people we work with, they're coming to us specifically because they can't see what's happening, right?
Yeah.
In security, there's governance issues, and being able to track the data moving back and forth, all the jobs, all the logs is really pretty important right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, the top one there is what we've kind of touched on earlier, which is, with a self-service portal. So, this is driven by like, hey, we have all this great automation, but there may still be some manual steps in there that people have to go through, whether it's an IT ticket or waiting for somebody else to execute the automation. So again, you see that kind of bubbling up because they really see the benefits and they're trying to get rid of that last mile of manual effort.
If there is a reason that we made the top 3 blue, right? A different color of blue, and it's because they all kind of lead to that that customer service, that the service aspect of this, which is you got to make it easier to use, you got to make it easy to do self-service, you got to make it clean, easy to navigate, get the reporting you need, and they can kind of lump them together pretty easily in terms of just a usability standpoint. Some of these other points I thought were really relevant too, and they kind of play to what you talked about earlier, which is when you start getting into more of the departmental usages. I want to do data pipeline, but I can't with my current tool, or I want to automate some applications, but I can't, right? There's a lot of I can'ts here. And I think that stems from the fact that this is sort of an older industry, and there are some older tools that have really large install bases, and there's some people that feel kind of trapped, right? So when they're looking for alternatives, these are the kinds of things, these are the use cases that are bubbling up. All right. So this brings us to our 6th top takeaway: centralized automation teams drive best practices. So, Peter, this question was really simple. Do you have a centralized automation team, and how many people are in it? What do we see?
Yeah, this was something that was, I think we saw a little bit last year's data too, which is, here you've got, pretty much over 90% having some type of team that is trying to drive, what I would call best practices, standardization on building automation. This is, whenever you get everybody doing something like the automation, if you let everybody choose their tools and their way of doing things, then you end up with a very high cost in terms of maintaining all these different things. And the automation, because it's taken, such a importance to companies, it needs to be operationalized, and some of this automation is running in a mission critical standpoint. So when you have a team that builds and a team that has to operate, you want to standardize so that you can get the benefits of something being common. And so these teams try to drive that. And sometimes these are called centers of excellence. Sometimes they're centralized teams that have to have some type of governance. So I think this is a good thing. There is this kind of tension of letting teams choose the tool that's best for the need versus having a common tool that an IT organization can centrally operate. So we do see that tension, but that's what these teams try to do, is to try to figure out what the best answer is.
There's another point here that I would say would be consistent with what Gartner talks about an awful lot, and it's this emergence of platform operations. It's sort of a newer discipline within enterprises where you have these central teams that are selecting the tools and the infrastructure that the rest of the business uses. And I think it coincides with this. Like Peter said, we haven't seen a shift in the volume of people that are like the size of these teams. They max out at around 50 people typically, and that's consistent. The numbers don't shift much between mid-size and enterprise companies. But this idea of platform ops and selecting the tools that people use is becoming way more common because of all the reasons that Peter talked about.
Yeah, I think when you get to the bigger teams, you expect them to be doing centralized development or augmenting development versus the smaller teams act more like consultants or maybe some level of governance. But it is something where as the automation footprint increases, you're going to see more companies kind of go to some level of a centralized team for the purposes we just mentioned.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, and so we have our last point here. SOAPs have grown in popularity. Peter, we don't have a data point beyond what we've already covered here, but why don't you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so SOAPs, service orchestration, automation platforms. Again, these what's interesting about this tool category or this software category is it's not meant to replace automation. What it's meant to do is really it can do automation themselves, but it's really saying, hey, you have all of this automation assets that you're using across the different environments that we talked about, different applications that we talked about, and you need to connect them in a business process or some sort of broader automated process. And so they have that kind of capability to do that, to integrate into all the different tools, all the different types of technologies that you're using, but then give it that enterprise grade way to operate it. So mission critical alerts, monitoring SLAs, taking corrective action when it needs to, providing metrics and reporting as we saw in one of the needs. So it's kind of this layer that's going to provide that across different automation technologies and processes. So it's kind of like, I think, a maturity as the footprint increases within companies, their automation footprint.
I mean, it's all about the orchestration aspect of it, right? And providing that orchestration as a service to the business. It kind of says it in the name. It is, as a 3-year-old category, being at 30% of what people are looking at this year, it's certainly taking off, right?
Yep.
That brings us to some recommendations that we have. This is for anybody, but also, there's 80-something% people that are looking for a new automation platform, right? So what do we want to tell them, Peter? What are the recommendations in that case?
Yeah, I think first thing is really to look at kind of a platform approach to automation, which is kind of what we just talked about with these SOAP tools, where you have a lot of automation that at some point the people building the automation and the people that operate it on a 7x24 basis, let's say, are different. And so when you have a platform approach, you're looking at, hey, how do I manage all of this automation? How do I plug in maybe all of these other different automation technologies into a common platform where I can operate it? And as I build more and more and more, my costs don't kind of escalate. I can kind of keep them in check because they all kind of come into this common platform. The other thing is really bringing all the teams together. We saw that most companies have these centralized teams that are trying to drive standardization, best practice, and really to kind of bring in anybody or any team that is going to be implementing automation to one, understand that there may be a higher level platform that they need to work with, but then also to drive some level of standardization within what they're doing. I think people tend to stay away from dictating what technologies people have to use, but they do want them to be aware of that. Hey, whatever you choose, needs to be kind of plugged into this higher level platform. So having the communication and the initiatives to kind of have all the teams participate is important.
And we've seen a tangible change over the last 5 years, right? It used to be that somebody would come to us and say, we want a new workload automation platform, right? Back when workload automation was the thing. And it would be the IT ops team and just the IT ops team. Today, it's much different. It's buying teams. It's teams that are filled with, usually led by IT ops, but sometimes not, that include people from cloud ops and data ops or just data teams and the dev teams. and even sometimes business users, right? They're trying to find that consensus, just like you convince anybody, right? You get them involved in the beginning to make the choice, and so the people, the end users, the buyers, the influencers have exponentially grown over that time period. To, every time we speak to a new prospect or even our current customers, it's not just IT ops anymore. It's much broader. I'll take the last point. So, implementing event-driven automation is pretty important for cloud costs. So just to put this in relative perspective, a lot of the tools out there still are doing things on time-based sort of automation. And what that means is at 2:00 in the morning, you run all your automation, right? Or 2:00 in the afternoon, or some point during a day or a week or a month, that's when you run your automation. And it doesn't have to be like that anymore. Event-driven is all about using system events to trigger automation. So it could be that a file, I'll use the example I used earlier, files dropped in an S3 bucket. The system reads that it was dropped in the S3 bucket and triggers a file transfer, right? It's these event-driven tactics that speed up and make automation happen in near real time. Now, as it relates to cloud costs, it really plays into your ability to turn on the cloud when you need it and turn it off when you don't. There's other examples, but that's the core, right? And the cloud can be expensive. If you let it just run, you get VM sprawl, it adds and adds and adds. When you're automating these things and you have the triggers in place to turn it on when you didn't, turn it off when you don't, there's pretty significant cost savings there, right? And if cost savings are the number one reason that that people are looking to automation, or to put clouds in there, or not to put automation in the cloud, or not to use the cloud, you can control it this way, right? So when you're looking for a new platform, look for something that's event-driven. Event-driven is not novel. There's lots of companies that do it, but a lot of the more modern cloud-only tools, the cloud schedulers, or the open source tools, they really can only do batch or time-based job scheduling. So be careful there, because you don't want to get stuck with just having that, especially in a world where things move fast, right?